can master it during the semester, it will really help you as you get through your upper division and eventually through your master's. All right. So I did want to start by talking about the art of visualization in architectural fields. So typically, we do start out with our orthographics, right? We have our plan, section, elevation, and these are great. You pretty much build an entire structure out of these without any use for any other type of drawing, because you have all your information on here, right? So it tells you everything you need to know. But when you think about presenting a project, you usually don't just present these types of drawings, right? So they are very informative. They do tell us a lot, but at the end, are they very emotional? Not really, right? If you were to present this to a jury as is, they might find it very interesting. They might come up and look at these space planning they're doing, but they're not really going to be sold on the idea entirely, right? So if you have a whole lineup of projects, you see this one, you might stare at it for a couple of seconds and walk right past it. So that's our first form, which is our orthographics. And the next step from that is going to be our models. Models are usually the second thing you learn to make in architecture school, and they're a step above it, because you do get to see plan, section, elevation all in one. You can rotate it, you can get a number of different views and begin to imagine what that could look like. But at the end of the day, you don't really give the viewer a curated view of your model, right? So they can pick up your model and view it in any way or form that they wish to, and that doesn't really create an emotional appeal, because you're not selling an idea. They're trying to find an idea in the model, right? And I quote Corbu's hand here because, again, what we ultimately need is the hand of the architect to tell us what should you be seeing, right? So they're great for understanding context, and once again, are they very emotional? Also, not really, right? So the next type of project or visualization that you traditionally learn to do are going to be our diagrams. And diagrams are used to conceptualize a singular idea. So this building by AAD was designed to be an apartment tower, right? And they had a couple of requirements. So first off, directly behind the tower, there were other buildings. This is New York City, right? And then the water line is going to be over here. So we have other buildings, and we're concerned about the fact that this new tower was going to block the view of the river, right? They weren't very happy about it. The second thing they wanted was open green space in the middle of the city. So they chose to go with this kind of rectangular donut shape. And in the end, they brought these two ideas and these together to create this. So if you've ever seen New York City's skyline from the Hudson River, you definitely see this building. It kind of looks like a triangle. So that way the tower that was right behind it over here could look right through it. The views wouldn't be blocked. You would have the green space. You would have the height. You would have the square footage that you needed, right? And if you show this to a jury, they're going to go, yes, I understand your concept very clearly. I see exactly what you're trying to do. But are they very emotional? Also, not too much, right? They might get you thinking and excited for what is to come, but they're not necessarily going to be the selling image of the project. And what is the selling image is always going to be the rendering, right? So when you have your hero image, everyone always tells you, if you view this going to be very evocative, you get great lighting. This is from Zaha Hadid Architects, so these are some of the best renderings in the world that you can get. And the thing about renderings is you get out of them what you put into them. So a rendering like this does take years and years of experience to create. You can see it's incredibly hyper-realistic. You need the technology and you need the skill set, right? So a lot of students at the beginning will take a simple Revit or writing model, they'll pass it through a rendering program in like a couple of minutes, and then it does pump out a rendering. Is it usually great? Not really, because you do need to spend a lot of time curating that view. Set up your camera, your exposure, your angle, perspective, the coloring, you have to post-process it, and all of these things, including the placement of people within there, are going to eventually create something like this. But if you were to simply put it into that rendering program and then just render it in a couple of seconds, it's not going to look this good. So as the creator, as the designer, you have to put in the work to make sure that your viewer receives that same information and that same level of emotion from what you are creating, right? And so ultimately the key to emotion is going to be perspective. You have to convey how you feel about your project first and foremost, so that everyone else can understand how they should feel about it as well. If you don't put effort into it, they're gonna walk right past it. It's not really gonna sell the project in the way that you wish it was being sold. So, as I mentioned, these do take lots of years of practice to make, lots of time. This could take somewhere from hours if you're very, very proficient to days if you are a intermediate, or even a whole week if you're a beginner to actually accomplish. Right. So this is the vessel in New York City. We have the as-built on the left, and then the proposed rendering on the right. What I want you to notice is that they're a very similar view. They're both in Hudson Yards. They're both set in New York City. They have the correct context to them. But the view that we see in the rendering is something that you will honestly never ever truly see in New York City for a number of different reasons. First off, New York City is very blue for the most part, or at the most kind of gray, which is why it's called the concrete jungle. So the image on the left is giving us a true depiction of what New York City is, right? It's a blue city. Over here on the right, we're seeing this really beautiful, kind of honey-colored image, which is never going to be there. But it goes to show us just how far the architect and the visualizer will take your imagination and sell it into a project, right? It's not that it's impossible to get this view, it's just not going to be your everyday view, right? You notice the sun is coming from right behind the tower up here. So it's probably around 3 o'clock in New York City, and to get this level of sunset colors, you need it to be like 6 or 7 p.m. once the sun is setting, for it to look this yellow, for it to look this pink. So you're never really going to get this deep coloring. But again, you get out of it what you put into it, and they put in the effort to color it correctly, to frame it correctly, to put the correct amount of people on it so that it is populated just right, so that it looks inviting, right? The trees are blooming, it's the correct season. And so ultimately this image is what sold it to the developer, and they said, yes, let's build it. Even though it's just a giant piece of art that's just sitting there, it doesn't really have any function other than to be a piece of art in the Hudson Yards, and yet they built it, right? Millions of dollars because it was sold from the image. But again, they do take a lot of time. And so the question that we're going to be answering today is there a quicker way to convey this much emotion, to convey a concept, to convey an idea with less time, and yet have it be just as effective? And so today we are going to be talking about the art of collaging. So, in a sentence, a collage is the art of storytelling in its purest and its rawest form. When you collage, you are curating a number of different pieces and bringing them together, and you are conveying to the audience a manifesto. So, collage can be used as a means of iterating ideas. So I'm going to show you some very early collages. These are from the 1920s. Okay? So we've been doing this for a while as architects. So in the 1920s, we do have Lysander, one of our early, modernists, the four masters of modernism, and he does create collages of iterating what materials he wants to put on his projects. So if you recall, Barcelona Pavilion has these beautiful pieces of marble and stone, and so what he does is he creates the line drawing, and then he cuts out these different pieces, material samples. So what you see there is an actual piece of laminated wood that he has, and he puts it on there to iterate what colors he wants, what stone variety he wants, where they should be placed. So it's a means of exploration for him as an architect. And so eventually we get this office building out of this rendering, right, or this collage. Now you see the collage is very minimal. There isn't much to it. It's very, very simple line work, and yet when you look at it, you get the idea of what it is, right? Even though all of this is empty space and we don't have the full context, as an audience, we can understand exactly what he's trying to portray to us. And when you look at the building itself, it's really not all that much difference. And yet that collage probably only took a couple of minutes to actually put together and iterate fully. Another example is his Barcelona Pavilion. It's a little bit difficult to see, but it's one of the only renderings of it that is left. So with this one, you can see the glass over here on the side. We know that that is a panel where he would have potentially put in different versions of stone, right? So you can't see it clearly, the panel would be this right here. And so that panel he would have used, and he would have cut out different pieces of materials and layered them on which one do I like to put into the final version. And And so we know he ultimately went with this piece right here, this beautiful red stone, because that was the final iteration. And so through collaging, he was able to get to that point without having to use rendering technology, which of course wasn't really a thing in the 1920s. This is another one, an office building, where once again, we do not have the full context, and he even has a couple of pieces. He has a random statue right here. Is it gonna make it into the final composition? We don't really know, right? But what we do know is exactly what he's trying to convey to us. This is the idea that he's trying to sell. And was it successful? Yes, because it was actually constructed in the end. He also has this one, which I think is one of his most famous renderings of all, right? So this is for a convention hall. This is a model, right? So he built a model, 3D model, which you can see on the top, and then he took a photograph of it inside, and he just copied the trusses over and over and over again to create this infinite view that would be what a convention hall looks like on the inside. So you can collage not only digitally, but by taking photos of what you yourself create. Then on the bottom, if you notice over here, this is a crowd of people, right? And he's using that as the flooring, as the bottom, so it's very vague, but it conveys to us that this is going to be a space with a high capacity and volume of people. It's going to be teeming with activity all the time, right? We're going to have some marble around the edges, and yet it's only 3 things, right? It's just these 3 lines going across with different textures, and it tells us all of that information. So this is his actual model that he constructed, right? This is an image he went and took. This thing is about a foot or a foot and a half tall. So you put the camera inside, took the image, and then you can see the truss system on top is what he then copies over and over and over to create that top portion, without actually having to go in and draw it or render it fully, right? There's another example, right? So for the convention hall, he decided to show us context. Now, keep in mind, in the 1920s, we didn't really have aerial images like that. So what he did was he took about 10 different images, and then he collaged them together so seamlessly that today it looks like it's a real aerial image when he plopped it in, but this is actually a collection of 10 images that were put together in order to give us this correct perspective. So if you look at the top left over there, where the building is, you can begin to see where the lines almost don't converge. So on your own time, look at it a little bit closer and you'll begin to see some of the seams. Before now, the point is that it's carrying the idea across, right? To present this to a group of developers, they're not going to be looking at the different scenes or the different images. They're going to be taking in the overall idea. Because that's what a collage gives us. It gives us an idea. It gives us an emotion. It tells us this is what it's going to look like. And we clearly understand it without having to fully render out the full thing. Later, Reese does begin teaching, and he teaches his students how to collage as well. Now, if you look at the image all the way in the back, that is an industrial warehouse in Detroit, right? So that is a place where they would have been manufacturing automobiles. And then he teaches his students to just layer planes into it and imagine what a space could look like within an industrial warehouse, right? And we can begin to see exactly what that idea is. So we know it's some kind of floor over here, some kind of floating ceiling, some walls, some divisions. It's very much in the Barcelona Pavilion style. And then they even add in this statue over here. So we can begin to imagine this is going to be some kind of office, some kind of art gallery. And yet they're not telling us the whole story, but it makes us want to know the full story, right? We're imagining it, we are kind of playing into what, in this case, the student is portraying to us. A collage is also a means of presentation, and that's what I want you guys to focus on for this semester. So, as a presentation, it is a very powerful tool. This is the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. So if you've ever been to it, it doesn't look like this in real life, but these are the renderings that sold the committee plan. Now you'll notice they are very simple, they're not hyper-realistic. This was in the late 80s, early 90s, so they did have the technology to help render it, and then they chose not to, right? They chose to go with this style instead with very sharp shadows. And if you look at the architecture, it looks very postmodern, right? So this is what it ends up looking like in real life, and then that is what the rendering showed us. The rendering ultimately is a manifestation of not just what the built architecture is going to be, but what its purpose is going to be, which is to showcase modern art. And that image on the left tells us that this image on the left, right? And yet the image on the left took a lot less time. You can see it's only a couple of colors, around 3 or 4 colors, and very short shadows. And all of that contributes to making it a very emotional selling piece for this project. So ultimately, it was constructed, it was successful thanks to these depictions. This next one is a proposed project by AAD, which begins and ends with collages, just to give you a sense of how broad the idea of collaging can be. So at the beginning, they create this concept, right? That's what they wrote. So they want to create a place that is a clash of distinct fragments and identities, could be the new territory of cultural radical agency with your core at its center. What does that mean? We won't really know until we see the actual architecture, but now we know that that's what we're working with, right? Something about bringing a bunch of things together, and by the look of the collage itself, we can tell there's kind of a day-night concept, right? We have some daytime images over here, nighttime images over here, something about space, exploration. We can begin to get what the vibe of the project is and its purpose is. And then if you look at the types of things that they're depicting here, there's a lot of movement, right? So we have this piece coming over here. We don't really know what that is. It looks like it's a piece to hold up lights. We have an elevator, we have a stair, we have mechanical components. So we know that whatever we're about to see is going to have movement, something to do with day and night, and something to do with a lot of things converging in one singular element, or in this case, a building. So this is the plan that they ultimately came up with, right? So there's our orthographic. Is it very emotional? Not too much right now, but we get the idea of what they're trying to show us, right? Now you can see that this specific firm does pay a lot of attention to the graphics in the way that they represent the text on it, right? So it's taking the orthographic to a new level, which I encourage you all to try, because it is very effective and it makes people look at your plans and your sections a lot more than they would traditionally look at them. There we have our model, right? So the next step in the process is the model. It looks great, right? It gives the viewer a lot of autonomy to decide which way to look at it. So we know that whatever they're creating is some kind of caged project that somehow opens up at night. We know that they're playing with this because of the lighting that they're showing us, right? We know that there's some kind of entrance, so we're beginning to get clues as to what this building is supposed to be. And then we begin to create these small photographs showing us the POV of the people that are going to use this building. So we begin to get a little bit more emotion here. Why? Because we're getting perspective. Because the designer has chosen to give us this specific perspective of the building so that we can put ourselves in the shoes of whoever is going to use that building. It's also a really cool model that opens up and has all these other layers. But the next thing we have is, of course, our diagram, which again, the diagram is meant to show a concept. And in this case, the concept is showing us circulation, right? We know there's event level, an office, and then a VIP level. And that's a very simple thing to see by the way that they colored it, the way that they're outlining these things. Where otherwise, if you showed us plans back to back to back, we might not necessarily capture that. But ultimately, at the end, what they're trying to sell are these images, right? So these are collage images, they're not renderings again. So all of these are different cutouts that are taken from different sources and put together in here to create a fantasy of what this could be. So it looks like this is going to be a suite, a spa suite during the day, but then it turns into like a different type of nightclub during the night. I'm not entirely sure what the point of the project is, as it is not constructed and there's not a lot of information, but it's up to interpretation, right? And from the renderings and for the collage renderings that they're making, we can begin to imagine what the point of this space is. Here's another one. It looks like this is meant to be some kind of Pilates club or art place during the day, and then during the night, it turns into a nightclub. And once again, all of these are different images that they cut out of different sources, and we put them together. So it's a curated experience of things brought together. So with this project, we see that it started with one type of collage, right? A sort of conceptual thing to get us in the mood of what we're about to see. And it also ends with a collage to give us a view of what we might be able to see if this were constructed, right? So maybe one day this will be built, and it will be because of these images that are selling us collage can also be used as a means of exploration for things that we don't necessarily want to build, that can't necessarily ever happen in real life, but that we can begin to imagine. So these are created by Miss Sylvia Garcia Camps. And what she does is she creates these what-if collages, right? So she says, what if we had this designer with this designer and this other designer work together? What would it look like? What would they create? So you can see she's taking pieces of distinct pieces of architecture that the three of them created. Some of them dead, some of them alive. There's a reason that they wouldn't be able to possibly work together. And she's imagining what it could look like if they were put together in one room to design, right? And she does that with a number of artists. And I want you to notice that she doesn't just use photographs, right? She also uses textures. She uses pieces of paint, textiles, ripped pieces of paper. She uses pieces of sponge. Because the collage isn't just being sold on images, but it's also being sold on anything. A collage could be a combination of anything that you find that sells an idea. Another one. So right here you can see she uses a little bit of textile. Do you guys remember when we talked about the Villa Maria last year with Oliver Also? Remember that he had his columns wrapped in leather. And the reason he wrapped them in leather is so that when you touch them, they would be nice and warm for human touch, and they wouldn't be these icy, cold metal steel tubes. And so to further convey that idea, the collage artist has put a piece of textile on here. So we know, even if you don't know the works of Oliver Also, we can begin to assume there's something about this architect, this creator, that uses warmth. He uses warmth in his projects, and we know that because she placed them there. She uses a bit of yellow over here, bits of pink over there, right? She's combining three different artists, Lily, right? We'll talk about Nice, Oliver Also, and another designer, and she's bringing them all together. And again, three of them are dead, so it would be impossible for this to happen. But through collage experimentation, we can imagine what would it look like. These are by Archigram. They have by far some of the blackest ones out there. We traditionally work on a real photograph, and then they paste a bunch of different little things onto it. So in the words of the actual architect, what he says that this is a mobile technological event that drifts into dreary towns via air balloons housing provisional performance spaces. The whole endeavor is intended to eventually move on, leaving behind advanced technology and new ideas in its wake. So we don't ever really get any concrete definition of what this is, right? He's not telling us it's a circus, he's not telling us it's anything in particular. He describes it as a concept, and he uses different images to bring about that idea. So the balloons tell us that whatever this is floating, it can move, it's transitory, right? We see that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of images, there's a lot of things clashing together. So even if you don't fully understand what he's trying to say, right? I don't really fully understand what exactly he's trying to do either. Through the image, I can see the idea that he's trying to sell to me. And this can be very powerful, again, if you are presenting a project. So say you're trying to make something like a cultural arts center, right? Where you are technically going to have art moving in and out of it, different people moving in and out of it. Having something like this to sell that idea would be such a great asset because you would immediately understand what the point of that project is without ever having to show a piece of actual building. So, a collage can also be a means of social commentary, and this is also why it is so important when you're curating these pieces to think about what your message is, because everything you do is intentional. Nothing in there is objective. It is all completely subjective, right? So this is a collage on Las Vegas. So I want us to begin to kind of dissect the different pieces of it. What do you guys see? What do you think the collage is trying to tell you? Because it's not just a depiction of Las Vegas, right? It's telling us things about Las Vegas. So does anyone want to take a stab at maybe one of the things that are being portrayed on here? Yes?
The traffic on I-15.
Yes. So for one, we do have the traffic on I-13. So we have a traffic problem, yes.
I was going to say along with the traffic, it is like it's black and white and really the actual city response to the city. It's more showing the highlight of the front side of
Yes, and then if you notice, it's also on the other side of this freeway. So the historic West Side has had a problem with the 95 historically because for a long time, it did cut off this side of town from the touristic side of town, right? And so eventually they did open up D Street, which was a huge deal because it was this passageway between the two that had been closed off for a long time. And so freeways are a problem because of that, because they do tend to segment communities, cut off communities, and also destroy communities by placing them in places where people already live. Yes.
The light pollution that gets.
Yeah, so we also do have the light pollution, right? So we have these hands coming in and cutting off the stars, which are actually stars from the Starbucks sign, right? So it's also a commentary on the neon that a lot of casinos use. Yes. Yeah, so we do have the mountains in the back as well, so it's showing a little bit of the dichotomy between what man builds and then the nature that's already there. Yes. Yes, and she covered golf courses, which you take up a lot of water, lawns. Okay. What else? Yes.
Is that new stickers about on the Las Vegas sign?
Yes, why do you think that is?
I was debating on it, I'm not really sure, to be honest, I just noticed it.
Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at why it has a new sticker on there? Yes.
Is it because, I know there is another Las Vegas sign, I think that's, it kind of, is like the border of like Henderson and Las Vegas, but then there's also the Las Vegas sign on the strip that people normally go to, they don't realize there is, and putting it in the city.
So it could be interpreted that way, that's the beauty of collages. But it's mostly used as a commentary on the fact that Las Vegas is constantly changing, right? Because of things like demolition, right? You take one thing down, you build something up. So Las Vegas is always new, right? No matter what time period that you visited in, it's always gonna be new because they're always refreshing it, either by doing this or by retrofitting it. You're never gonna visit old Las Vegas. It's not really a concept that exists, it's always new. Yes.
I also see the golf course at Wayne, the water fountains, Melania, and the police on the weekend. All of the features of the beach, you can see.
Yes. Yeah, so we do have our Bellagio fountains as well, we do gondola, and then of course we have the water pumps because the casinos famously do pump the water from our aquifers instead of taking it in through municipal water pipes. So yeah, the more you look at it, the more you can extract from it. It was supposed to be submitted for a city collage competition, which is supposed to be a critique of any modern city in the world. And so I created this in my third year of undergraduate with a friend. So this was the competition entry. It was then canceled because I guess there wasn't enough people that wanted to join it. But this is what came out of it, right? And I'm showing it to you because I created it around the same age as you guys when I was in school. And it's a very powerful form of social commentary, right? And it's similar to what you're going to be doing in your first type of assignment, where you will be assigned a city, and what you're going to be doing is looking at the history of that city, the current state of that city, and future plans for that city. And you're going to be conveying those three concepts through collages, right? So for example, in the present day Las Vegas, this would be a great way to depict what it is, some of the issues, some of the good things about it, and depending on who views it, you're going to get different things out of it, right? We live here, so we understand a lot of the issues that we see, but for a tourist or someone that's not familiar with Las Vegas, they might see it and they'll just see the playground of America, right? That's what they'll understand from this image. So that's what you guys are going to be working on for the next month. So now I'm going to show you a step-by-step guide on how to create a collage. All right, so step one in creating a collage, you do need a manifesto, right? right? Because every collage has a purpose, it has an agenda. You can't just say, we're making a collage without any kind of politics involved in it, right? There's always a reason to create one. So for instance, if you're making a collage on architecture, the manifesto is not architecture. The manifesto is, what do you think about architecture? What is architecture to you? What's wrong with architecture? What's good about architecture, right? Because the moment that you start putting images together, you are putting yourself into it, right? And if you tell someone else to make a collage on architecture, it's gonna look different, right? Because everyone has a different view on what architecture is. So step one is to define what that is supposed to be about. What is the overall idea that you're trying to sell to us? So for your first assignment, as I mentioned, when you get your city, if you're gonna do the history of the city, you have to summarize what is the history of that city. Is that city very innovative? Is it very conservative? Is the city very much about destroying the old and bringing in the new? Does it have good history of conservation? You have to study that and make the manifesto on your own. But once you have those manifestos, you can then begin to build upon them from that ideas. So a good manifesto is three things. Number one, it is straightforward and is not a nebulous arrangement of things. So when most people think collage, or at least when I think of just regular collage, right, you think of like things you make as a teenager where you put out a bunch of images and paste them together on a poster board, right? If you're into like boy band, you put all the collages together. And that is a certain form of collage, but for architecture, it does always have a purpose, right, and a larger meaning behind it. So you want the idea to be straightforward, so that you can portray it on there, and that with other people, they can at least understand what that idea is, and they won't be looking at it wondering what it is looking at, right? Number two, don't put yourself in a box by being too narrow and too literal. So if you were to say architecture is skyscrapers, you can't really collage too much out of that. You kind of just have to show skyscrapers, because that is the definition that he chose to go with. But if you say, going back to last semester, the first reading we ever had, recall Raskin, he said, what is architecture? And his answer is architecture is emotion. That's a good enough manifesto, because now you are taking a stance, and it's very broad. Emotion can be a lot of different things, so you can bring in textiles, you can bring in 3D pieces, you can bring in newspaper clippings, you can bring in anything and argue this is architecture because it's emotion, right? So you can get very subjective and very artistic with it as well. And lastly, it should be provocative. So viewers should be able to quickly respond to and interact with what your manifesto is. You don't just want them staring at it and reading it, right? You want them to be able to look at it for at least a couple of minutes and try to dissect what you're trying to tell them, right? Think about what are they trying to say with this? What is the meaning of this? What does that mean? And a lot of times you're going to create things that you didn't even know were there, right? So we're going to work through them together. So the manifesto for the collage that we're going to create right now is this course, right? So the manifesto is that analysis of the built environment is a course that will take a closer look at urbanism, diversity, the desert environment, Las Vegas, and film, right? That is the manifesto. That is what I want to show within this collage. And notice that it does use an action verb, right? We are taking a closer look. That's what we're going to do through the collage. If I were to just say the manifesto is urbanism, diversity, desert, Vegas, and film, that's fine, right? You can make a collage out of that, but what about it, right? The point of the course is to take a closer look at it. Now, step two, you're going to begin collecting your materials. So once you have that clear purpose, you can go out and look for anything you can get your hands on. Now, again, this doesn't just have to be 2D pieces like photographs. It can also be other types of things like text, newspaper clippings, cards, textiles, 3D prints, etc. Anything that you feel fits the narrative of what we're trying to sell is valid in a collage, right? That's the beauty of it. So you don't want your source materials to be explicitly comprised of architecture either. So when you are making your city collages, I don't want to see a bunch of images of just the city put together, right? I want to see other things, because a city isn't just its buildings. Remember that architecture, or the built environment, the history of the built environment is place, time, and the building itself. So only 33% of it is the building itself. The other 66% is the context. And so you should be depicting that in your collage as well. During this stage, I don't want you to narrow anything down. for the first 2 weeks of your project, I encourage you to just be collecting images that you feel are going to sell an idea. Of course, you'll first have to conduct your research so you know what the manifesto is going to be. But once you know that, you can go out and start collecting pieces, right? And just kind of sit on them for a while. As you begin to kind of marinate in the idea, it will change over time. So you use the time that you have to your advantage in order to allow you to fully comprehend and develop it to its full extent, right? So don't do it the last night because it's not going to be great. All right, so when I started collecting images, I'll tell you I had around 3 times the amount of images that you see on here. I have lots of images. I just didn't want to put all of them on here, and honestly, I lost track of some of them. So I had all of these images, and I'll go through them with you to explain why I chose each one of them. So the first image is a woman with binoculars, right? So that goes back to our taking a closer look. And sometimes you do want to get literal with showing it because it is an image that typically doesn't have words. So you want to be able to sell an idea very strong, right? So what sells us the concept of looking any more than binoculars or a telescope or a microscope, right? We're taking a look at something. So she's going to be the one that's going to be looking at stuff. For urbanism, I brought in a plan that is actually made by one of the designers we'll be looking at. And then I also brought in a city that we're going to be looking at on Tuesday. So I'll have my urbanism covered. Then for the next unit on diversity, I do have Ray Eames, I do have Paul Revere Williams, and I have one of his projects, right? So I want to showcase that. On top of that, I also have Denise Scott Brown's sketches where she says, I am a monument. So it can also be a combination of different mediums, right? Then I also did want to bring in some texture to it, so I brought in a blueprint architectural grid over here. I brought in a little bit of Franklin Wright just because he is going to be a important figure during the course. So I said, let me bring in this rendering I like, and then the signature, which on Tuesday I told you that he did like to scribble his signature over his apprentice's work to say that it was his. So I was like, okay, that kind of sells the idea of what I'm trying to show. Then I moved on to the desert, so I brought in Mojave Desert, then I have Vegas with its sign, a little bit of neon, and then film, right? So I'm going to show this film poster. So I have all these, and then again I have around 3 times the amount of these, so you can see that only about 30% of the images actually ended up making the cut. And as I was creating the collage, I noticed that the images I liked didn't always necessarily fit in the best, so I did have to trade it out for other images, which is why it's important to have a stash of things that you can pick from. Step 3 is going to be your composition. So for this, you want to start thinking about how you want the pieces that you have to interact with each other. Do you want them to be competing with each other? Do you want them to be working with each other? Do you want there to be a certain hierarchy? How do you want to frame it? So I did reference photography techniques on here because those are going to be important. So you want to think about your rule of thirds, symmetry, asymmetry, if that's what you're trying to portray, a dominant top portion or bottom portion of it. All of those things are going to directly influence how you interpret the collage. So it's important that you compose it first and foremost to fit those needs. So you can also begin to divide your source material into categories. So in my case, I do have different themes I break it into. But in your case, you might say the history of a city is 1, 2, and 3. And you might divide your images into those groups. So now you have 3 groups, more or less, that you want to show on that collage. And you can begin to form like 3 blocks on your page and say, idea 1 is going to be on the top left, idea 2 is going to be over here, and idea 3 is going to be somewhere on the bottom, right? So you can begin doing that. You can divide it based on idea, color, texture, place, genre, whatever you're trying to portray, but you need to begin to formulate some blocks of categories. Think about your background, middle ground, your foreground. What do you want to be closest to you? Because all of those are going to be important. And lastly, what do you want your focal points to be? Because naturally, our eye is going to be drawn to a point on that collage, right? The instant you see it, you're going to be looking at a certain point. So what do you want it to be? So I started creating my composition. I said, okay, I want to have it be the title, actually, for most of the PowerPoints. So I knew I was going to have some title, subtitle of whatever the lecture is going to be, a line. And then, of course, I'm going to have my woman seeing. So I said, okay, she's going to be somewhere over there. And she's right? And this is a conscious choice. And the idea could be solved by not doing this, but I chose to go with this, right? So now I have this to work with, and I can begin to plot down the images that I want on here. So I'm gonna add my woman on here, right? She's gonna sort of be a placeholder for now. And I can begin to think about the background, right? So on this bottom portion, I said, I want the background to be a map. So this is where this fits in. Middle portion, I want to use this desert image. And then for the top portion, I want to go with something that can almost play off of the fact that it's a blue sky, right? So I'm already thinking about how am I going to show the desert. And I said, I'm going to crop out this sky portion. And I'm going to make this architectural blueprint the sky instead, right? So it kind of creates this in-between space of reality and drafting, which is what architecture is. And it also makes it a little bit less busy, right? Since I already have two busy pieces, I'm gonna have a less busy background up here. Then I'm gonna say, okay, I'm gonna bring in stuff that's gonna be on top of there. So I said, I'm gonna bring in my cool bridge aqueduct from Carcassonne, and I'm gonna put that on top of here. And I wanted to kind of blend the desert with this over here. To kind of become a bridge between the two, literally. And then I said, I kind of want this to be a focal point. I want that to be somewhere in the middle. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I want that to be there. Then I said, okay, I'm going to bring in my cowgirl, right? And I kind of like that she was in this position where she's sitting, so I said, it'd be perfect if she was just kind of at the end of this bridge aqueduct. So she's going to be somewhere around there in the end composition. For my movie poster, I'm looking at the colors, right? And I go, well, it's primarily red and blue, which would go really well with my blueprints, right? It's a busy poster, and I want it to shine on top of a not so busy background and work off of that. So I know I want that somewhere up there. Then I have Ray. If you notice, Ray is using her hands and she's looking down. So I'm thinking about what she's doing, and I go, okay, it kind of looks like she's somewhere on a top position looking down at something. So I'm going to put her towards the top of my collage and see what I can do with her later on. She's going to go somewhere up there. I have my biggest sign, which is a very vertical piece. So I was like, okay, I kind of want that to begin to fill some space on the left, which is looking quite empty for now. Maybe I stretch it out. It could potentially be this sign that comes out of there. I didn't know yet, but I knew it was going to be somewhere over there. Then this right side starts looking a little empty, so I'm like, let me bring in Paul Revere-Williams. He's going to be over here on the right. And because I brought in this project, I thought, what if I showcase this project in a really fun way? Or what if the conch is inside of it? What if he's opening up this book with a piece of his architecture, right? And that's another form of storytelling. So I'm saying Paul Revere-Williams is literally the author of this piece. So then I continue adding more things, right? So again, this map was created by one of the female architects in Frank Lloyd Wright's office. And I told you, he likes to scribble over people's work. So I was like, okay, let me bring in his signature. And I know it's going to be somewhere along the bottom over here, over her drawing, to kind of showcase what that unit is going to be covering. Then I have his rendering, and I didn't really know what to do with it yet. So I said, let me leave that off to the side for now. And next we go to layering, right? So once you have your pieces generally put where you think you want them, foreground, background, you have a general position for them, you can begin to play with the depth. What do you want to be on top? What do you want to be on bottom? All of that is a powerful storytelling tool because it implies hierarchy. And hierarchy tells us what you think is important or what you want to convey, right? So you always want to be asking yourself, why is one image in front of another one? Why is it covering a piece of something else? And think about your manifesto when you're doing that. What would your manifesto say should be on top? What are you trying to tell us is more important? And you want to have fun with your layering by letting go of your notion of scale. So one of the hardest things when collaging is you have to let go of realistic proportions, which is sometimes difficult for architecture students because we're constantly told to think about perspective and the human eye perspective, right? Especially in that kind. So when you're collaging, you don't have to think about that. You can have a bird that's the size of a human, you can have a building that's the size of your pinky if you wanted to, because all of it is a storytelling technique. And you want it to make no logical sense, right? You want it to be fun, because the less logical sense it makes, the more you want to look at it, the more you want to dive into it to understand, what am I looking at, right? And then step 5, cropping. I'm combining these two because it's kind of hard to show one without the other. So with cropping, now that you have your images and you know what goes on top of what, you can begin to remove pieces of the different photographs with different textiles that you have, right? So you can crop them depending on what you need. So if I go back to this image, right, I don't need all of this white space around the I am a monument sign, right? Or in this case, I don't need the foreground, I just need this bridge. So I'm gonna crop everything out. With Paul Revere Williams, I don't need the bookcase, so I'm gonna crop and cut him out of the image. And with his conch, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna cut out the sky because I don't need that piece. So some questions you should be asking: do you need the entire image or just a specific piece of that image? Would the composition look better without certain pieces of that image in it? Could you cut a singular piece into many different pieces, right, and disperse them throughout? So I'll show you what I do with that Franklin Wright rendering in a second. Could you extract and could you rotate those pieces? So it's also really fun to begin to play with rotation. You can make things go upside down if you're trying to make a point. You can make things mirror themselves if that proves a point. And the way in which you crop pieces is also a good tool, right? So you can create it with very clean cut edges, which tells you you put a lot of care into it, like it's curated. You can use raw cut edges, right, which tells us that it was made with haste, it was made quickly, it's something that has movement to it. You can do oversized edges, overall crops, subject croppings. So I'm showing you all of these in the collage that we're making, just so you understand why I made the different decisions that I made. Right, so now it's starting to look like this. So at this point, I've cropped a couple of different pieces. You'll notice I do have raw edges right here and then on the top as well. Because I'm trying to kind of create this idea that we have a white piece of paper and I'm ripping away a piece, right? I'm ripping away and peeling back the layers of the class to show you all these different things that we don't usually cover in history, right? So just by using this raw edge and it not being clean, we know that maybe this isn't supposed to be this way. Maybe this is something that was ripped out in order to show it to you. For my bridge over here, you can see I did use the exact cropping, so I don't have any oversized pieces on it. It's exactly what it used to be. But if you do look at Paul Revere Williams, I did crop him a little bit bigger, right? So he does have a big outline, because I kind of want him to look like a comic figure, right? With he's on top, he's pasted on top, rather than being an exact cutout. And at this point, we do want to start to get artistic with it. Not everything has to have a super deep meaning. It can also just be, I want to play with different techniques. From Franklin Wright's rendering, I did cut out a little line things that I thought were kind of cool, and I thought they could add some movement to the piece entirely. And you can see I dispersed 3 of them throughout. So I extracted it from there and then put it all over the image. With the biggest sign, you can see I did extract only the sign, but then I tilted it, and same thing with the architectural grid. Instead of keeping it straight, I did decide to tilt that as well. I did stretch out the desert image so that it's more horizontal, right? You can see the conch inside of there is inside his book now, so now I have that. And I have my I am a monument, and I decided to get rid of the little box at the bottom, right? I just wanted the sign at this point. And then step 6 is overlaying. So this is where you are now adding your creations to the collage. Because at this point, you've just been curating and setting things up. But now you can put your hands on top of it to further emphasize certain points, right? So you can highlight pieces to show that they're important with a literal highlighter. You can outline them to show hierarchy. You can use lines to connect different pieces. You can also use things like string, right? So if we're thinking about textile 3D pieces, we could use string to glue one piece to another to show a direct connection between 2 things that would immediately catch your eye, right? You could use dashes to show things that are invisible ideas that could be there. You could also use text, right? Put text over something to show that you're trying to say something else. I'll show you that in a second. And the reason that we overlay is because we don't always find the exact pieces that we want to use. So we have to create it ourselves, right? So we can also sketch out a piece. So if I wanted to sketch something out, I could put that into the collage. Now I am not only the curator, but also one of the artists within that collage piece, right? putting myself in there. And sometimes being the omniscient narrator is a powerful tool, right? So you might want to distinguish between your original source material and your contributions. So say you want to show that all of the things you got are black and white, but when you go and write on top of it, everything's red. So we clearly understand that you, as the creator, have this sort of footprint on it that is delineated in red only, whereas the original pieces are all in black and white, right? So again, you can get super creative with this. There's a number of different things that you can do. And so our final collage ends up looking like this. So you can see I did change a lot of the source material on this point. So for starters, I did color some of these because I am thinking about overall composition and color theory, and I do want to balance out the colors in here. So I'm going to go blue, yellow, yellow on blue, and then pink on gray so that it pops, right? So we create a little bit of hierarchy. Then I go, I'm going to use sprinkle gray signature, but I'm going to make it white instead so that it's not black. So it kind of creates a complement to the white layer here, right? Then I go, okay, I want to make gray a little bit colorful so she pops out a little bit, and I told you that I was going to use her because she's looking down. So if you notice, her arm is resting on where the mountain ends. So she's interacting with another layer of composition. Color your Williams in blue to top off of the gray, and he does have this kind of roasted image behind him just to add emphasis, right, to highlight that he does have a legacy, for instance, right? Over here, it doesn't say I am a monument anymore, right? So I went out and I found this stamp that said architect, and I pasted it on top of there. So now you clearly know that I'm trying to tell you that I am an architect, right? It's giving us a certain message there. You can also see I did color up a couple different things differently. I did crop this, and you can see why I chose to put the playtime poster over the blue because the colors play off of each other quite well. And then I decided to make our desert black and white. And one, because it does create this nice contrast between the foreground colors and the background, and also because the desert is usually an ignored environment and biome that doesn't get a lot of attention and is usually treated as a nuisance, right? People don't like designing the desert too much. So I made it in black and white. And all of this put together kind of gives us a summary of what the course is. So we can begin to understand a little bit, even if you have never read the syllabus, you don't know anything about this course, you can understand at least that we're going to learn a little bit about Las Vegas, something about the desert, something about these figures, film, and some woman that's looking at them, right? You can get that general idea from him. So at the end of this, which is posted, I do have some extra sources. I do recommend you look through them. So over the weekend, your homework of sorts is just going to be to research collages, look at them. There's a lot of different examples here, and I want you to look at different artists to begin to pick out what you like. What is it that you're attracted to? What would you like to try to recreate? My style of rendering collages is going to be very different from your style of rendering collages. You're going to have different reasons for doing things. So if we go back to that archigram one, where it's more overlaying, right? That's very different from this, when you're cutting and composing to put them together. So on Tuesday, when you come back to class, I am going to give you your actual assignments so that you can begin signing up for your stage and looking at the actual requirements. But for now, I kind of just want you to sit with the idea of collaging, take it in, and do some research of your favorite collage artists so that you can begin to formulate ideas in the future. I didn't want to give you the assignment just yet because I knew you would just jump right into it and look for stuff. I want you to research science first, right? I also did want to say, I believe they're going to change our classroom on Tuesday to the right hall. So that's over kind of by the SU where the history department is. I will send you guys an email or an announcement with more information once I know a little bit more, but we will most likely be over there. So keep an eye out for that. And I'll probably put a sign out on here as well in case you come here next Tuesday. Does anyone have any questions on today's lecture? Yes. So So for your project,